A Baltimore mother is behind bars after police say she admitted to killing her two young children. This all stemming from an investigation from a disturbing discovery on Coventry Road yesterday afternoon.
WMER 2 News' Dave Detling has more on what the mother told detectives. He's at police headquarters for us tonight.
Well, police say they were able to track down the mother early this morning. They've identified her as 28-year-old Jamerria Hall. They say she confessed to killing her kids to detectives. Now investigators are looking into her background to see if there were any red flags.
The summer heat hung heavy over southwest Baltimore as maintenance worker Marcus Johnson approached apartment 1106 at Coventry Manor. August 24, 2021, a date now etched into the city's darkest history. Something wasn't right, Johnson would later tell detectives. That smell, you don't forget it. Following multiple tenant complaints about an overwhelming odor, Johnson used his master key to enter the apartment. The blinds were drawn, casting the room in shadow. Empty food containers littered the countertops. A children's backpack lay abandoned near the door. As Johnson moved deeper into the apartment, the stench intensified. He called out, receiving only silence in return. When he pushed open the bathroom door, the horror that greeted him would haunt Baltimore for years to come. Inside the bathtub lay the body of 6-year-old Jamerria Thomas, nude and partially decomposed, with fabric wrapped around her neck. In the bedroom, Johnson discovered 8-year-old Davin Thomas Jr. in a sleeping bag, a knife protruding from his chest and a plastic bag covering his head. The apartment, once filled with children's laughter, had become a tomb. The walls that witnessed their final moments stood silent, holding secrets that would soon shock an entire city. But where was their mother? Jamerria Hall, 28, had vanished. Neighbors hadn't seen her in days. The children's beds were still made, their toothbrushes dry in the bathroom cup. A half-eaten meal sat on the kitchen table, as if time had frozen in that apartment while the outside world continued. 24 hours later, Baltimore police located Hall. What followed was a confession so disturbing that even seasoned detectives struggled to maintain composure. A mother admitted to taking the lives of her own children, drowning her daughter and stabbing her son. The question that echoed through police headquarters, courtrooms, and eventually homes across America: why? What forces can drive a parent to commit such an act against their own flesh and blood? What invisible pressures build until they shatter the most fundamental bond in human existence? As we explore this heartbreaking case, we'll examine not just what happened inside apartment 1106, but the years of warning signs, missed opportunities, and system failures that preceded that fatal August day. This isn't just a story about a crime, it's about two children whose lives mattered, about mental health crises left untreated, and about a system designed to protect the vulnerable that ultimately failed them. What drives a parent to harm their own children? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters as we try to understand these tragic events and perhaps prevent future heartbreak. Welcome to Dark Trace Crime Stories, where we bring you the real stories behind the headlines. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell so you never miss a case. And for those of you who've been here before, thank you for supporting stories that matter. Davin Thomas Jr. was just 8 years old when his life ended, a third grader with a wide smile and curious eyes. Friends described him as thoughtful and protective of his younger sister. He loved superhero movies and would often wear his favorite Spider-Man t-shirt until it needed washing. His teachers noted his eagerness to learn, particularly in science classes where he asked endless questions about how things worked. 6-year-old Jamerria Thomas had recently started first grade. With bright beads adorning her braids and a fondness for colorful clothing, she brought energy wherever she went. Neighbors recalled her skipping through the apartment complex, often humming songs from her favorite cartoons. She had a collection of stuffed animals arranged carefully on her bed, each with a name and backstory she'd created. Together, the siblings formed a tight unit, navigating their sometimes unstable world as a team. They were often seen playing together at the small code playground near their apartment building, Davin patiently pushing Jamerria on the swings or helping her across the monkey bars. Their apartment held signs of childhood joy amid the chaos. In one corner of their living room stood a small table, hand-painted by their mother with a sky theme, fluffy white clouds against blue background. This table was where they would color, do homework, and eat snacks after school. It represented a glimpse into the nurturing side of Jamerria Hall that neighbors occasionally witnessed. Those kids were her world, at least that's what she wanted everyone to believe, said Tanya Williams, who lived in a neighboring unit. She'd bring them to community events, dressed perfectly, always taking photos for social media. In 2020, Hall appeared on a local podcast discussing single motherhood. The recording captured a moment that now haunts listeners. Hall laughingly referred to Davin and Jamerria as her little mini MES, while the children giggled in the background. She described their personalities, noting how Davin had inherited her analytical mind and Jamerria her artistic tendencies. "They're the reason I get up every morning," Hall said during the interview. "Everything I do is for them." The podcast painted a picture of a devoted mother working hard to provide stability, a stark contrast to what investigators would later uncover. While Hall presented herself as a dedicated parent overcoming obstacles, court records revealed a history of endangering the very children she claimed to cherish. School records showed periods of unexplained absences. Neighbors reported hearing arguments through the walls. There were moments when the children appeared withdrawn, speaking only when spoken to directly. "Looking back, there were signs," admitted Marcus Johnson, another resident at Coventry Manor. "The kids stopped playing outside as much. When you'd see them, they seemed quieter, almost nervous." The gap between public perception and private reality widened as Hall's mental health deteriorated. While she maintained appearances in public, attending parent-teacher conferences and posting family photos online, behind closed doors, the children navigated an increasingly unpredictable environment. Davin and Jamerria adapted as children often do, developing sensitivity to their mother's moods, learning when to be visible and when to remain quiet, finding small joys where they could. They created their own world together, a sibling bond strengthened by shared experiences both good and bad. They deserved to grow up, to discover their potential, to build lives beyond the confines of apartment 1106. Instead, they became victims in a tragedy that many believe could have been prevented. To those who encountered her at school functions or neighborhood gatherings, Jamerria Hall presented as the model of maternal dedication. At 28, she navigated single motherhood with apparent grace, always ensuring Davin and Jamerria appeared well-dressed and well-mannered in public. She would show up to every parent-teacher conference, recalled Ms. Winters, Davin's third-grade teacher. She asked detailed questions about his progress and always volunteered to contribute to classroom supplies, even though you could tell money was tight. Hall cultivated this image carefully. She participated in school fundraisers, attended community events, and maintained what neighbors described as a put-together appearance. The sky-themed table she painted for her children stood as a physical manifestation of her creative investment in their happiness, a detail she highlighted when visitors came to the apartment. "She wanted everyone to see her as Mother of the Year," said Tanya Williams, who lived down the hall. "Always taking photos of the kids doing activities, always talking about their achievements." Indeed, Hall's social media accounts portrayed an idyllic family life. Her Instagram featured carefully arranged photos of family outings to parks, libraries, and occasional restaurant treats. She posted about educational activities she planned for the children and shared proud moments of their academic accomplishments. But between these curated glimpses into her life, concerning patterns emerged. In late 2019, Hall's posting became erratic, sometimes sharing multiple updates within hours, followed by weeks of silence. The content shifted too, moving from cheerful family moments to lengthy, rambling reflections posted at odd hours. "The system wants to break us down," read one 2 a.m. post from November 2019. "They don't want to see a strong black mother raising kings and queens. They'll try to separate us, but we're unbreakable." Another post questioned whether unnamed people were watching her and the children. "I see them following us at the store," she wrote. "They think I don't notice, but a mother always protects her cubs." Friends occasionally commented with concern on these posts, but their questions went unanswered. Instead, Hall would return days later with perfectly normal updates about school projects or weekend plans, as if the disturbing content had never existed. The pressures of single motherhood weighed heavily on Hall. Financial struggles meant frequent moves before settling at Coventry Manor Apartments. Employment records showed a series of short-term jobs, retail positions, administrative work, food service, none lasting more than a few months. Child support was inconsistent at best, with court records showing multiple attempts to enforce payments from the children's father. Being everything to two growing kids, it takes a toll, Hall said during a 2020 interview with a local parenting blog. I'm their mom, their dad, their teacher, their nurse, their cook, their emotional support. Some days I don't know which way is up. This sentiment appeared repeatedly in her private journals, later discovered by investigators. Pages filled with increasingly frantic handwriting detailed sleepless nights, financial worries, and growing paranoia about outside threats to her family unit. No one understands what it's like, she wrote in one entry from early 2021. They all judge, but no one offers real help. The kids are the only ones who truly love me. What neighbors, teachers, and social media followers couldn't see was Hall's deteriorating grip on reality. Behind closed doors, her behavior grew increasingly unpredictable. She established elaborate routines around locking doors and windows. She sometimes kept the children home from school due to perceived threats. She began covering windows with aluminum foil, a detail mentioned by maintenance workers who occasionally serviced the apartment. Those closest to the situation noticed subtle changes in the children's behavior too. Once outgoing and talkative, they became more reserved in public settings. Davin took on a protective role beyond his years, often speaking for his sister and watching his mother's face carefully before answering questions from adults. What no one outside the family knew was that Hall had a troubled history, one that should have raised red flags long before the events of August 2021. The carefully constructed image of devoted motherhood concealed darker truths that would only fully emerge after it was too late for Davin and Jamerria. 3 years before the murders that would shock Baltimore, a different crime revealed the dangerous reality behind Jamerria Hall's carefully maintained facade. On a spring night in 2018, Hall arrived at her mother's home where she was staying with 5-year-old Davin and 3-year-old Jamerria. What happened next would later be detailed in court documents that paint a disturbing picture of a mother's actions. As the children slept in a back bedroom, Hall methodically moved through the house with clear intent. She began by removing the batteries from every smoke detector, disabling each one to ensure no alarms would sound. She gathered family photographs from the walls and shelves, placing them in a pile in the living room. Then she collected papers, clothing items, and household objects, adding them to the growing mound of combustible materials. With the children still asleep, Hall set fire to the pile. Flames quickly spread across the living room as Hall watched. The fire grew, consuming furniture and climbing the walls while smoke filled the home. Only the timely intervention of a neighbor who spotted the blaze and called 911 prevented a tragedy. Firefighters arrived to find the front of the house engulfed, with Hall standing outside and the children still asleep in the back bedroom, dangerously close to the spreading fire. When questioned by investigators, Hall's explanations were inconsistent and concerning. At times she claimed not to remember starting the fire, at others she suggested it was an accident. But the deliberate removal of smoke detector batteries told a different story, one of premeditation and disregard for her children's safety. This wasn't an impulsive act, Prosecutor James Wilson would later state in court. This was calculated. She disabled safety devices and created a situation where her children could have died in their sleep. Hall was arrested and charged with first-degree arson, reckless endangerment, and child endangerment. The severity of these charges reflected the gravity of her actions. She had knowingly created conditions that could have resulted in her children's deaths. In the aftermath, Child Protective Services temporarily removed Davin and Jamerria from Hall's custody, placing them with their maternal grandmother while the case proceeded through the courts. Psychological evaluations ordered during this period noted concerning thought patterns and potential delusional thinking, but no comprehensive mental health treatment plan was established. The legal process moved forward, and in late 2018, Hall accepted a plea deal. She was sentenced to 1 year in jail, a punishment many would later criticize as insufficient given the potential consequences of her actions. She served her time at the Baltimore County Detention Center, receiving minimal mental health support during her incarceration. What happened next represents one of the most critical failures in this case. In 2019, following her release, Hall petitioned to regain custody of her children. Despite her recent conviction for endangering these same children, the court scheduled a custody hearing. The children's father, who had been inconsistently involved in their lives, failed to appear at this crucial hearing. His absence proved decisive. With no competing claim for custody and an apparently reformed Hall presenting herself as stable and remorseful, the judge made a fateful decision. Davin and Jamerria would be returned to their mother's care. The system failed these children at every turn, said child welfare attorney Mark Sherman, who later reviewed the case. A mother who deliberately created a situation where her children could have died in a fire regained custody just months later with apparently minimal scrutiny or safeguards. Court records show that while CPS was supposed to conduct follow-up visits and monitoring, these check-ins were inconsistent and superficial. Case workers noted the children appeared adequately cared for and that Hall maintained appropriate housing, but there's little evidence of deeper evaluation of her mental state or ongoing risk assessment. No mandatory mental health treatment was established as a condition of regaining custody. No regular psychological evaluations were required. The red flags from the arson case, particularly the deliberate disabling of smoke detectors while children slept, weren't given the weight they deserved in determining Hall's fitness as a parent. This represents a catastrophic breakdown in the systems designed to protect vulnerable children, explained Dr. Elaine Foster, a child welfare expert who studied the case. The 2018 arson wasn't just a warning sign, it was a 5-alarm fire that the system chose to ignore. This story raises serious questions about our child protection system. What state are you watching from, and how does your local CPS handle similar cases? Share your thoughts in the comments below. By summer 2021, the facade Jamerria Hall had maintained was crumbling. Neighbors at Coventry Manor Apartments noticed increasing signs of instability in the months leading up to August. The once attentive mother who carefully managed her public image began showing visible signs of distress. She started looking disheveled, recalled apartment resident Keisha Taylor. Her clothes didn't match, her hair wasn't done. This was a woman who previously never left her apartment without looking put together. Hall's behavior grew increasingly erratic. She began having loud, one-sided conversations in the hallways. Maintenance requests from her apartment described strange concerns, claims of water running uphill in the bathroom sink or complaints about neighbors drilling holes in the walls at night. When workers arrived, Hall would often refuse to let them enter or would follow them closely, watching their every move. The children's school reported mounting absences throughout spring 2021. When they did attend, teachers noted concerning changes. Davin stopped participating in class discussions, his teacher reported. He seemed constantly tired and jumped at loud noises. Jamerria, once social and engaged, became withdrawn, often sitting alone during recess. By July, Hall had pulled both children from summer programs they were previously enrolled in. Neighbors reported seeing the family less frequently. The blinds in apartment 1106 remained drawn day and night. When the children did appear, they were quieter, thinner, and rarely smiled. Hall's social media activity reflected her deteriorating mental state. Posts became increasingly paranoid, with references to unnamed enemies and threats. "They're watching us through the television," read one post from July 28. "Had to cover all the screens in the house. Staying vigilant." Another stated, "The food they want us to eat is poisoned. Growing our own now." Photos showed containers of sprouting beans on the apartment windowsill. On August 10, 2021, Hall called her mother in an agitated state. According to later testimony, she claimed people were after the children and that she needed to protect them from what's coming. Her mother suggested bringing the children to stay with her, but Hall refused, saying it wasn't safe to travel. This call represented a missed opportunity for intervention, as no authorities were contacted despite Hall's clearly paranoid statements. The timeline of the final days emerged through neighbor testimonies and forensic evidence. On August 16th, a delivery driver bringing food to a nearby apartment reported seeing Hall in the hallway, muttering to herself and appearing disoriented. On August 17th, both children were absent from their summer reading program without explanation. August 19th marked the pivotal day that would later haunt the entire apartment complex. At approximately 6:30 p.m., multiple neighbors reported hearing a child's voice, later identified as Jamerria's, crying out, "Mommy, no," followed by what one resident described as a thud and then silence. Tiffany Wilson, who lived in the apartment directly below, recalled hearing water running for an unusually long time that evening. It was like someone left the bathtub on full blast for over an hour, she told investigators. I almost called maintenance to check for a leak. Another neighbor reported hearing a male child's voice, presumably Davin's, repeatedly asking why, in a frightened tone around 8 p.m. that same evening. No sounds from the children were heard after that night. On August 20th, a neighbor encountered Hall in the laundry room, noting that she appeared oddly calm and was washing what looked like bedsheets. When asked about the children, Hall replied they were, with their father for the weekend, the first instance of the lie she would repeat over the coming days. That same day, Hall called her mother again, this time with a markedly different demeanor. She calmly stated that the children's father had picked them up for a visit. When her mother expressed surprise, the father rarely took both children for extended periods. Hall insisted everything was fine and quickly ended the call. On August 21st, security cameras captured Hall leaving the apartment complex alone, returning with several bags of groceries. On August 22nd, she was seen discarding multiple trash bags in the complex's dumpsters. A maintenance worker later recalled noticing Hall making several trips to the dumpster, which seemed unusual as she typically sent the children to take out trash. By August 23rd, residents began complaining about an odor emanating from apartment 1106. The building manager attempted to contact Hall by phone but received no response. A note was left on her door requesting entry to check for potential plumbing issues. On the morning of August 24th, the apartment manager authorized maintenance worker Marcus Johnson to enter the unit after multiple complaints about the increasingly powerful smell. What he discovered would forever change everyone connected to the case. The timeline established by medical examiners would later confirm what neighbors had suspected. The children likely died on the evening of August 19th, the night Jamerria's plea of "Mommy, no," echoed through the hallway. For 5 days afterward, Hall continued her routine, shopping, doing laundry, disposing of evidence, while her children's bodies remained in the apartment. Perhaps most chilling was Hall's continued deception. On August 23rd, just 1 day before the bodies were discovered, she texted her mother, "Kids are still with their dad, enjoying the quiet house." This message, sent while she lived alongside her children's decomposing remains, revealed the profound disconnect from reality that would later become central to her legal defense. On the morning of August 24, 2021, maintenance worker Marcus Johnson approached apartment 1106 at Coventry Manor with a master key. After days of resident complaints about an increasingly powerful odor, the building manager had authorized an entry to investigate potential plumbing issues. Johnson knocked several times, announcing his presence before using the key. As the door swung open, he was immediately struck by the overwhelming smell. The apartment was unnaturally quiet, blinds drawn, creating a dim interior despite the morning sun outside. Empty food containers and discarded cleaning supply bottles littered the countertops. Something felt wrong right away, Johnson later testified. The smell was unmistakable, but it was the stillness that really got to me. Moving cautiously through the living room, Johnson called out again, receiving no response. When he reached the bathroom door and pushed it open, he discovered a scene that would haunt him for years to come. 6-year-old Jamerria Thomas lay in the bathtub, her body in an advanced state of decomposition. She was unclothed, with what appeared to be a piece of clothing wrapped around her neck. Johnson immediately backed out of the bathroom and called 911, but his grim discovery wasn't complete. While waiting for police, Johnson noticed another odor coming from one of the bedrooms. Inside, he found 8-year-old Davin Thomas Jr. in a sleeping bag on the floor. The boy had a knife embedded in his chest and a plastic trash bag covering his head. Baltimore Police Department officers arrived within minutes, securing what was now clearly a crime scene. Detective Sarah Rosenberg, the lead investigator assigned to the case, described the apartment as methodically cleaned in some areas, completely neglected in others. The bathroom showed signs of extensive cleaning. Empty bottles of bleach and disinfectant were found under the sink, and the surfaces appeared recently wiped down. In contrast, the kitchen contained rotting food and unwashed dishes, suggesting a disorganized mental state. Forensic teams documented the scene meticulously. They noted that despite the cleaning efforts, blood evidence was found in multiple locations, including splatter patterns on the bathroom walls that had been partially cleaned. The knife in Davin's chest was identified as coming from the kitchen of the apartment. The medical examiner's findings, released days later, confirmed what investigators suspected. Jamerria's cause of death was determined to be drowning and strangulation. Evidence suggested she had been held underwater in the bathtub while being strangled with the fabric found around her neck. Davin died from sharp force trauma, multiple stab wounds to the chest, with the fatal wound piercing his heart. Based on decomposition rates and witness reports of when the children were last heard, the medical examiner estimated both children died on the evening of August 19, 5 days before their bodies were discovered. As investigators processed the crime scene, a citywide search began for Jamerria Hall, who was nowhere to be found. Security footage showed her leaving the apartment complex early that morning, carrying a small duffel bag. She had not returned. Police located Hall on August 25, just over 24 hours after the discovery of her children's bodies. She was found in a distressed state at a nearby hotel, where she had checked in under her own name. When approached by officers, she reportedly said, "I know why you're here," before being taken into custody. During subsequent questioning, Hall confessed to killing both children. According to police reports, she admitted to drowning Jamerria in the bathtub while strangling her and then stabbing Davin multiple times. The confession, described by one detective as emotionless and matter-of-fact, provided procedural details but left the crucial question of motive largely unanswered. When asked why she had killed her children, Hall's responses were inconsistent and disjointed. At times, she claimed she was protecting them from unnamed threats. In other moments, she stated she couldn't remember her reasoning or would simply stare silently at investigators. The confession painted a picture of a mother who had completely detached from reality, capable of describing in clinical detail how she took her children's lives, yet unable to articulate a coherent explanation for why she had done so. The legal proceedings against Jamerria Hall moved slowly through the Maryland court system. After her August 2021 arrest and confession, she was held without bail while undergoing extensive psychiatric evaluations. These initial assessments raised significant questions about her mental state both during the killings and at the time of her arrest. The case finally reached trial in early 2024, nearly 3 years after Davin and Jamerria's deaths. The courtroom was tense as prosecutors and defense attorneys presented starkly different portraits of the defendant. Prosecutors argued that Hall's actions showed planning and awareness, pointing to her methodical cleaning of the crime scene, her deliberate deception about the children's whereabouts, and her flight from the apartment before the bodies were discovered. They emphasized the 2018 arson as evidence of a pattern of endangering her children. This was not a sudden break from reality, prosecutor Michael Stevens told the court. This was the culmination of years of escalating behavior that Ms. Hall concealed from authorities. The defense strategy centered entirely on Hall's mental state. Dr. Rebecca Chin, a forensic psychiatrist who evaluated Hall extensively, provided pivotal testimony that would ultimately shape the outcome of the trial. Ms. Hall suffers from severe psychiatric disorders that profoundly impaired her ability to understand the criminality of her actions, Dr. Chin testified. During the period surrounding the deaths of her children, she experienced acute psychotic symptoms, including paranoid delusions that her children were in imminent danger from external forces. Dr. Chin described Hall's belief system at the time of the killings. She had become convinced that government agencies were planning to abduct her children for experimentation. In Hall's distorted thinking, killing them was an act of protection, saving them from a fate she genuinely believed was worse than death. This is not a case of someone who didn't know killing was wrong in general, Dr. Chin explained. Rather, Ms. Hall's illness created a reality where she believed these specific actions were necessary and protective. She could not rationally evaluate the criminality of her behavior in that moment. 2 additional psychiatric experts corroborated this assessment, describing Hall's condition as including elements of schizophrenia and delusional disorder. Medical records revealed that despite multiple encounters with the healthcare system following the 2018 arson, her underlying mental health conditions had never been adequately diagnosed or treated. After 2 weeks of testimony, Judge William Harrington rendered his verdict on February 15, 2024. Jamerria Hall was found not criminally responsible for the deaths of her children due to her mental illness. Rather than prison, she was committed to a state psychiatric hospital for treatment, where she would remain until deemed no longer a danger to herself or others, potentially for the rest of her life. The ruling sparked immediate and divided reactions. Mental health advocates praised the decision as recognizing the role of severe psychiatric illness in the tragedy. Others, including some family members of the victims, expressed outrage at what they perceived as Hall escaping justice. Those babies deserved better from their mother and from the system, said Hall's cousin during a courthouse press conference. Everyone failed them: the courts, CPS, the mental health system. Nobody saw what was happening until it was too late. The children's father, who had been largely absent from their lives and had missed the crucial 2019 custody hearing, expressed regret through his attorney. "If I had known how sick she was, I would have fought harder for my kids. The system gave them back to her after she tried to burn them alive. How does that happen?" The verdict brought legal closure but left unanswered questions about how the tragedy could have been prevented and whether systemic changes would follow to protect other vulnerable children in similar situations. The deaths of Davin and Jamerria Thomas represent more than just another tragic headline. They serve as a powerful call to action for communities, institutions, and individuals. Their story illuminates critical gaps in our social safety nets and offers important lessons that could save other children's lives. Mental health intervention stands as perhaps the most crucial area for improvement. Hall's deteriorating psychological state presented numerous opportunities for intervention that were missed or inadequately addressed. "We need to move beyond crisis-only responses to mental illness," explains Dr. Lauren Foster, a psychiatrist specializing in maternal mental health. Regular screening for parents with histories of concerning behavior should be mandatory, not optional. And when we identify problems, treatment must be accessible and consistent. Effective intervention requires removing barriers to mental health care, including cost, transportation, and stigma. Community-based programs that bring services directly to high-risk families have shown promise in similar cases. These programs combine regular home visits from qualified professionals with practical support for daily challenges that can exacerbate mental health issues. The case also highlights the importance of community vigilance. Neighbors at Coventry Manor Apartments noticed concerning changes in Hall's behavior and heard troubling sounds from the apartment, including Jamerria's final plea of "Mommy, no." While some residents expressed concern to each other, none contacted authorities. Bystander hesitation is common in these situations, notes social worker Marcus Johnson. People worry about overreacting or interfering in private family matters. But when it comes to child safety, it's always better to report concerns and be wrong than to stay silent and be right. Public education campaigns can help communities recognize warning signs that a child may be in danger: dramatic changes in a parent's behavior or appearance, a child becoming withdrawn or showing fear around a parent, unusual isolation of a family that previously engaged with neighbors, and concerning statements from either children or parents that suggest unusual thinking patterns. Child protective services require fundamental reforms to prevent similar tragedies. The current system often focuses on reaction rather than prevention, intervening only after harm has occurred rather than identifying and addressing risk factors proactively. CPS agencies need resources to implement differentiated response models, explains child welfare expert Tanya Williams. High-risk cases, especially those involving parents with histories of violence or endangerment, should receive intensive monitoring with frequent in-home visits by specially trained caseworkers with reduced caseloads. The Hall case demonstrates the critical importance of follow-up care for parents with violent histories. After her release from jail for the 2018 arson, Hall received no mandatory mental health treatment, parenting classes, or regular monitoring as conditions of regaining custody. When a parent has demonstrated a willingness to endanger their children, reunification should never be automatic, says Family Court Judge Robert Thompson. It should be a carefully managed process with clear conditions, including mental health treatment, parenting education, and graduated visitation that increases only as stability is demonstrated. Perhaps most importantly, systems must communicate with each other. The fragmentation between criminal courts, family courts, mental health services, and child protection agencies created information gaps that allowed Hall's case to fall through the cracks. These children's story deserves to be shared. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so we can continue bringing awareness to cases that demand our attention. By understanding how systems failed Davin and Jamerria, we can work toward changes that will protect other vulnerable children from similar fates. Davin and Jamerria Thomas never reached their 9th and 7th birthdays. Their lives, full of potential, resilience, and the simple joys of childhood, were cut short in an apartment where they should have been safe. Yet in their absence, their story has become a powerful catalyst for change. In the years following their deaths, their names have been invoked in Maryland's state legislature during debates on child welfare reform. The Thomas Children Protection Act, introduced in 2023, seeks to establish stricter protocols for cases involving parents with histories of violent behavior or child endangerment. The bill would mandate comprehensive mental health evaluations before reunification and create specialized caseworker units with reduced caseloads for high-risk families. At Coventry Manor Apartments, residents transformed a corner of the community code playground into a memorial garden. 2 cherry trees, now growing taller each year, stand alongside a small plaque bearing the children's names and the dates of their short lives. Each spring, as the trees bloom, neighbors gather to remember Davin and Jamerria and renew their commitment to community vigilance. The elementary school they attended established an annual awareness week focused on child safety and mental health resources. Teachers receive specialized training on recognizing warning signs of family crisis, and students learn age-appropriate strategies for seeking help when they feel unsafe. Baltimore's Child Protective Services implemented internal reforms following a comprehensive review of the case. These changes include mandatory supervisor review of all reunification plans involving parents with violent histories and improved coordination with mental health services for at-risk families. Perhaps the most meaningful legacy lies in the countless conversations their story has sparked, in living rooms, classrooms, and community centers across the country. Each time their names are spoken, each time their story prompts someone to check on a neighbor's child or report a concerning situation, Davin and Jamerria's lives continue to matter. As their former teacher reflected at a memorial service, they were children who looked out for each other in life. Now, through their story, they're looking out for other children who need protection. That's a powerful legacy for 2 young souls who deserved so much more time. If this story moved you, like this video, subscribe and turn on notifications, because these are not just stories, they're lives, and they deserve to be remembered. We'll see you in the next one. Stay safe and stay aware.